My name is Marcel Congozo, and today I will be proving that if A implies that B implies C, if A implies B, it must also imply C, which is the problem that we have on the screen at the top. And another way of describing it would be saying if A is happening, leading us to B, B leads us to C, then knowing that A leads to B, it will also tell us that A leads to C. And so, as we go through this problem, we have a few steps from 1 to 8, as you'll see on the screen. And there will also be words that you might not be familiar with, or these steps you might not be familiar with, and I am prepared to explain it to you. And as we get to vocabularies that you will not be familiar with, I will use easy examples to make sure that you understand it the best way possible. So let's get started. So for our first step, we want to assume that A implying B, which is implying C, is a premise. So we get to our first one, which is premise. And to explain it to you, premise is a statement that we are going to make in order to prove our points. So for example, let's say I have a friend and I want to convince him to study because final exams are coming up. What I can do is tell them that people tend to study well. People will tend to do well on exams when they study. And so that is my premise. That is my premise to get to my conclusion, letting them know that they will do well if they study for the exam. And so we want to assume that if A is true, then B implying C is also true. In other words, if A happens, then B implying C must also happen. They go hand in hand. For our next step, let's assume that A implying B is the premise for the inner subproof. And we get a new one, inner subproof. To explain it to you, inner subproof is a mini within a bigger proof. You want to use it as a way to show that something temporarily leads to a conclusion until we find the actual conclusion. For example, let's say there's a little kid and we want to convince that kid that when they finish the homework, if they finish the homework, they will get ice cream or they will get to play video games. And we can use it as a conclusion to prove that since they finished the homework, they can eat the ice cream. And so, back to our problem, we want to prove the implication that A implies B, which then is applying A, which is implying C. We need to assume that A implying B is true. And this would mean that if A is true, then B is also true. And to show that A implies C, we want to prove that if A is true, then C must also be true. From step 1, we assume that A implying B. From step 1, we assume that A implying B, which is then applying C. That helped us know that if A is true, then B must also be true. And what this showed us was that if A is true, then B must also be true due to merge exponents. And there's a new word, merge exponents, which I want to also explain to you. Merge exponents, to use an easy example for you to understand, is saying if it rains, the ground will be wet. And it's also like saying if this, then that, meaning that in order for something to happen, something has to occur. Something before that has to be true. So, in order for the ground to be wet, in our case, it will be true if it rains. So, and another example is in order for that to happen, this needs to happen. So, from step 2, as we assume that A implies B, we know that if A is true, then B must also be true. Due to merge exponents, which I was able to explain just now. Since B is implying C, and we have B in step 5, we can use merge exponents to get to C. Since we have from step 3 to step 6, since we have step 3 to step 6, which means that A implies C due to conditional proof. A will be implying C due to conditional proof from step 3 to step 6. So we get a new word, which is conditional proof. And I want to go over quickly what the goal of conditional proof is. The goal of conditional proof is to explain that if something happens, that something will follow that will be true. So using the rain analogy again for this question, if it rains, something else will follow, and that thing will be the ground will be wet when the first statement, which is A raining. And so due to step 2 where A implies B, and due to step 7 where A implies C, we are able to show that A implies B, which is then applying A, which is implying C due to conditional proof. And through the step 1 to step 8, we can use the conditional proof to prove the entire tautology. And there is my explanation as I wanted to prove to you. If A implies B implies C, then if A implies B, if A implies B, it must also imply C. I hope that made sense. Thank you for listening.